I'm really feeling now, holy crap, there's a lot of good people who are donating money to him and his foundation who really believe that the majority of their money is going to the rescue and rehabilitation of the children. This is a whole bunch of TV stations and promotions of Tim Ballard's face, but I'm not okay with that if the purpose is a political run or anything other than helping to rehabilitate these kids. The worst thing that can happen is for millions of good men and women who saw the Sound of Freedom movie to then get disenfranchised and not wanting to help fight this evil. Thinking that for some reason, because somebody is working in a place that's out of integrity, that somehow that child trafficking doesn't exist. Not true. I have been there. I've been there so many times, and so many good men and women have been there as well. Welcome to another episode of Liberating Humanity. I'm Paul Hutchinson, and this is the most difficult episode that I've done so far. I'm going to talk about my history with Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad, and why I made the decision to leave more than 5 years ago. Tim, if you're watching, I am grateful for the fact that you brought me into this work. I am so sad for what has happened. I'm going to go back to the beginning. Many of you who are listening to this have heard some of my other podcasts and have heard how I got a phone call about 10 years ago from our Attorney General, Sean Reyes. That phone call changed my life. He told me about a Homeland Security agent. He wanted to bring him to this event that I was going to. This was a friend of mine who had a theater. He had sold his company for like over $1 billion, and he had this beautiful theater, home theater at his home, and we would have a guys' movie night once a month. And we had one rule: no pitches. We can all come and just enjoy time together, and I was bringing some of my investors and some close friends, and Sean wanted to have this Homeland Security agent present what he was doing to rescue the children to some of my friends. And I agreed to have him come. And I met Tim Ballard for the first time. I was told that he was a former CIA agent, worked with Homeland Security, and had all this credibility in fighting child trafficking. He stood up on the stage at the end of the film. I don't even remember what movie we were watching, but he stood up on the stage and he started talking about his history and working with the government in fighting something that I couldn't even believe was a thing. People selling children for sex. I couldn't imagine that something this evil even existed in the world, and I was enthralled. I thought, if my goal is to have a powerful, positive impact in the lives of other people, what better thing could I do than to have a positive impact on the lives of these children who were in the pit of hell? He had a guy there with him that was running the finances for his foundation he was putting together named Dave. That night, I got some texts from some of my friends, some of the investors that were there at that event. They said, be careful with that guy. I said, what do you mean? You know, he's got credibility. He's been in Homeland Security. He goes, no, it's the guy that he's with, that Dave guy. He stole millions of dollars from me. I'm like, really? That didn't make sense. What do you mean? He says, well, he had this investment thing and he just, everybody lost all this money. And so I reached out to Tim. And I said, hey, I'm really interested in helping out with what you're doing with putting this foundation together, but I can't introduce you to any of my investors if you have somebody like that. And so he immediately asked me to help him to fix the problem. And in my mind at the time, I thought, you know what? I'm willing to do whatever I can to fight child trafficking. And if it means taking out the garbage, then I'll take out the garbage. And so I asked to have a meeting with this Dave guy. And we sat down and we went through what he was doing. And he said, yeah, I had this investment and it went bad and I lost this money and whatever. And I said, listen, I've been in the investment world for a long time. Sometimes things go bad. And the best that you can do is operate from a state of complete integrity. Be an open book. Just show them. All you have to do is say, listen, this is where your money came in. This is what we thought. This is what we believe was going to happen. And this is where it went. Right now, you've got guys thinking that you took that money overseas and you bought a Ferrari, whatever. I said, all you have to do is act with integrity. Well, over the next few months, he ended up getting let go of the foundation that Tim was putting together. And I'm sure he thinks it's my fault. And I'm telling you, it wasn't. I was there just trying to help. So at this point, I'm introducing him to some of my investors. I had credibility with them because I had been managing their money for a while. And I have some friends that were wealthy. And I introduced him to some of my friends. I took some of my own money. And then I got a phone call from Tim. This is the one you've heard about as well, where I was at this opulent hotel. I was raising money for my fund. I had $2,000 cufflinks on at the time, right? I'm in this suit that cost more than the first car that I ever bought. And Tim calls me up and he said, hey, Paul, he said, I'm here in Cartagena, Colombia. There's not just 20 children here. There's more than 50. There's more than 100 children in the surrounding areas. And I think we can rescue all these children. Now, this rescue mission was not Paul Hutchinson's idea. I had nothing to do with the setup. This was all Tim and his team. And I'm grateful for everything that they did to put that together. And I'm grateful for that phone call to come and be a part of that mission because it changed my whole life. I remember sitting there on this chair. You guys have heard this story. I'm sitting on this chair and this little girl being sold as a virgin with these other children were brought out, paraded in front of me. And I look into this child's eyes and all I could see was fear as she was trembling. And I made a promise at that moment to myself, to God, to that child, and to children everywhere who are suffering like she was, that I was going to dedicate my life to eradicating that evil from the face of the earth. Now, the only connection I had to eradicating that evil was the foundation that Tim was putting together at the time. In fact, this was so early on that I don't even think they had their own 501c3. They were working with Elizabeth Smart's foundation and using that as a caveat to kind of work with them. They even brought in Elizabeth's father to help with them at the time. And I was naive. I was just watching. I'm there learning. There was a bunch of guys that were way more trained than me, guys that were former special forces, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, good men and women who are willing to put their lives in danger to help save these kids. And so when I first got down there, the first thing that I noticed as I'm looking back and remembering all of this stuff, that there was cameras everywhere. Now, there was cameras in the car that were recording Tim as he's telling the story as we're going in on the operation. There's undercover cameras that are filming everything that was going on with the traffickers. And then at the operation, there was a whole bunch of undercover cameras. In fact, one of them almost tripped up the whole operation because in the middle of our negotiation, boom, we heard a thud and one of them dropped, right? Because it was in a place that wasn't as secure. And I was told that the reason for all of that footage is we needed to make sure that the children never had to stand trial. They never had to be a witness. We needed all that stuff so that we could send that information to the authorities to ensure that these guys stayed in jail for good. And Tim was out there. He was telling the story after the effect and before lots of cameras, which was fine, and it still is. I want you to know that if we didn't have cameras on that operation and some of the others, we wouldn't be where we are today with the massive awareness that is going on globally to fight child trafficking. 10 years ago, this was not a subject that almost any of us had heard. I had never heard of it. I'm betting that most of you who are listening to this today, 10 years ago, you didn't even know that child trafficking was a thing. Why? Because there wasn't the little things that are showing up on the Delta screen when you're on the plane. There isn't the things in the airports when you're going through. If you see something, say something about child trafficking. You're not seeing all these posters. This is a movement that is global, and it's working. Millions of children are living in a better place. Millions and millions of adults are aware of something today that they weren't aware of before. So, do I say that it wasn't right to have cameras all over Tim and all over the operation? No, it was wise. It was a good thing. Now, what happened was there was a group called the U.D family. And they had donated a whole bunch of money to film these operations. And then there was a group, Chet and Fletch. Good men. And I'm going to tell you later where my heart is with them. But they saw the vision of wanting to fight child trafficking. And they were willing to put in their time and their money and their resources to be able to take this story of the children to the world. And so I start getting to know Tim a little bit better. And he starts telling these stories about how he's got this backing. He's got this backing from leaders in the Mormon church. Now, understand this. This is important. I have no ill will towards the Mormon church, towards any church, anybody, anywhere that is teaching people to do good is of God. However, I haven't been a member for the last 15 years, and my parents are still active, my children are still active, and I have so many good friends that are still active members. And so this is not anything negative about this. This is talking about what I saw from the beginning. So there was this push saying, this is God's work. I believe that. This is God's work. God's children are not for sale. The Sound of Freedom movie got pushed under the rug by all the mainstream media saying that it was a religious movie. It's not a religious movie. Just because Jim Caviezel says in the film, God's children are not for sale, does not mean that it's religious film. Because all of us are God's children. And the 10 million children globally that are being sold into trafficking are all God's children, and they're not for sale. As we continued moving forward, I was asked by Tim, and that very soon after that first rescue mission, I said, that changed my life. That changed my life forever. I had a goal that year. I was going to buy an Aventador. I had a white Lamborghini, convertible white Lamborghini. I already had it picked out. I had the pictures of it. I had 4 or 5 different places that were selling. I was trying to figure out which is the best deal, et cetera. I was going to buy that Lambo that year. And I said, listen, I'm not going to buy that car. I want to take that money and I want to donate it. I want to help. What can I do? How can I help? And I was told this. Tim said, listen, he said, I want to go public. I need to be on CNN and ABC and all of these stations. He said, we have to have somebody who's the face of child trafficking. And he had all the credibility. He had been working in it for a decade longer than the one day that I was involved with it. So he had all the credibility to be there. And so we had this talk. We had some other Navy SEALs and Green Berets, other operators. All of us signed off on this agreement that we were going to have him be the face. And so what would happen was this. Moving forward, I was asked to go down on that first rescue mission as not as Paul Stone, Paul Steele, Paul Black. I was asked to go down as me, as Paul Hutchinson. There was no time to put together any levels of security from an online presence standpoint. I was me. And that in and of itself was dangerous. But then he said there's guys that can go out and identify where these children are. But these traffickers especially for these big parties. One thing that works really well is a wealthy guy who's going to come down and fund these parties. Now, I had pictures of me with Ferraris and Lamborghinis on the back of super yachts and with jets and everything else. I had this opulent lifestyle. So I took down everything tied to the real me and put together this fake profile. This is something that I did. The foundation didn't do it. Operation Underground Railroad, Tim didn't do it. This was all something that I didn't want to go and put my life in danger in that way, where I was coming down as the real me, but I was willing to come in and play that part. Now, here's the thing. Looking back over the last 10 years, the common thread between all of these traffickers that I met, the common thread wasn't tattoos on their cheeks. It wasn't a bunch of earrings in their ears and their noses. The common thread was arrogance, greed, and lust. I saw it everywhere with these traffickers. And I'm going to talk about how that energy plays in all of our lives, including mine at the time. Now, understand, I wasn't in anywhere. None of us as operators were attracted to that horrific thing, and we would put our lives in danger to ensure that those evil people were not hurting children. But there came a point over the last 10 years where each of us had to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, how has arrogance and greed and lust, how is it affecting me and my life? How is it affecting my relationships with other people, with my family, with my business partners? How is it affecting everything around me? And that should be the thread of this conversation as well as we move forward. So I agreed, hey, we're going to go undercover. I'm going to come and I'm going to show myself as this rich guy at these parties. And for over a year, that's what my role was. We had operators that would go undercover. These were good men and women. The guys like Dave Lopez, amazing man. He's a man of integrity. This man, if you watch the documentary called Operation Toussaint, he's the one with the dark curly hair with the huge muscles that gives the prayer in the middle of that film right before the operation. He's a good man. He was there in that first operation. He's been on a whole bunch of others since. He was involved. There was a guy by the name of Glenn. Glenn worked in the dark web. His team is some of the best hackers anywhere. And he would identify exactly where these traffickers were. He would go onto the dark web, identify where the pedophiles were, the traffickers, and instead of just big shotgun approach, he would be able to have a very focused effort in identifying where these guys were. We could go in as teams and find them. I went in with Glenn in Costa Rica and Nicaragua and a number of other countries in Haiti. So good men and women that were dedicating their life to fighting trafficking. Now, Chet and Fletch, they had this documentary company. They put together a documentary called The Abolitionists. Some of you may have seen it. If you were involved back 10 years ago, you saw Abolitionists. I realized that that's why these cameras were there, is to start putting together these documentaries. Now, there was a disagreement. Now, I don't know the details of it. From what I can understand, the disagreement between Tim Ballard and Chet and Fletch was this. Chet and Fletch wanted to have the focus of the documentaries. They wanted to have the focus be on the children, on the plight of the children, the rescue of the children. They wanted that to be the focus. And they wanted, and I was told from Tim that all they wanted was to have their face and their name. No, it was because there was a lot of stuff going on with Tim's face and Tim's name that was there. There was some contention there. That's all that I know. And there was a breakup. And so I get approached by Tim. Now, I had already helped take the garbage out before with this other guy that was working with the foundation. Now we've got a problem with these guys, and they start talking crap, so to speak. Tim said, "Look, these guys are going on social media and stuff. They're talking bad about me. They're talking about O.U.R." This is what I hear from Tim, and Tim's exact words were this. He said, Anybody that tries to take down Operation Underground Railroad is trying to take down the fight against child trafficking. Anybody who's talking bad about me is talking bad about what we're doing and helping with the kids. And he spun this narrative that was if anybody went against him and his mission and the foundation, they were against fighting child trafficking. I was part of that energy. I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I was all in. I'm willing to take out the garbage if I have to. Well, these guys had also talked some crap about me as well. And at the time, I'm running a multi-billion-dollar investment fund. My credibility was worth a lot. And if somebody's saying things about me that are untrue, then I legally have the right to go after them for defamation. So I did. I hired some attorneys. And their attorneys, after a few months, they called a meeting with me and my attorney, and they said, listen, we can't fight you. You are 100% right here. You're going to win. You're going to win $10 million on this suit. No doubt about it. And I said, listen, all I want is for them to stop talking crap about Tim Ballard, right? Because this is what I was. I was the Porter Rockwell, right? I was the guy that was going to get my hands dirty so he can keep his hands clean. And I said, and while you're at it, stop talking crap about me. You tell them no more, and I'll drop it right now. Now, if Chet and Fletch, if you're watching today, because I've reached out to you since. I am sorry, because I was believing that you were trying to destroy the work that was saving children. I didn't see the whole picture at the time. So as we continued to move forward, I continued to do more operations. And I had agreed to be a part of this new foundation that Tim put together. They wanted me on the board of directors. I agreed, so fine, I'll be on the board. And it was like the governor's board or something that I was on just early on. And as I continued to do operations, then Tim came and he said, listen, the board has, we can't have you both. You can't have your face anywhere. Right? If your face is tied to the foundation, then you can't be doing the undercover work. They don't want this kind of a conflict there. And I said, that's fine. I'll walk away from the board because I want to be there. I want to be there when we're rescuing the kids. I want to help in that capacity. And I think that I can be very effective at doing so. So I removed myself from the board and then continued doing these operations. So then I get a call from Tim, and he said, hey, we've got a problem. I said, really, what's the problem? He said, Chet is trying to come into Haiti. We're doing all this stuff. We're trying to find this Guardy. We've got the cameras and everything else that are there. And he wants to come in with his own cameras, and he wants to follow up with some of these leads. And he's going to get in the way. He's going to hurt the foundation. He's going to hurt our search for Guardy. What it really was that the attention was going to be somewhere else. And so, but I didn't see that at the time. He said, we need to make sure he can't even get into the country. We need to call the attorney general here and just make sure he can't even get into the country. Now, I said, Tim, I don't have the relationships. What do you want me to do? He said, oh, I'll call him, whatever. So he's blocking somebody else from coming in and doing some of this work and helping to rescue kids just because he was separated. I'm like, okay, that's kind of interesting. Then there's a guy by the name of Glenn. I talked to you about him before. Glenn is a good man. And I get a call from Tim. This is a few months later. He's saying, hey, Glenn's on the out. Glenn is trying to extort the foundation. He's trying to get all this money from the foundation and don't talk to him again. Just cut him out. And I'm like, okay, I've done some undercover work with Glenn, but I don't see that. But okay, I'll cut off all communication there with Glenn. And he said, we need to make sure that he can't ever work in this business again. We need to make sure that, I'm like, no, I don't see how that applies here, but I won't have any communication if that's what we need to do. So then I get a call and he said, hey, we've been talking to the board of directors and they are uncomfortable with anybody who's working for O.U.R. They're uncomfortable with them doing the pre-op work, the deep cover. That this is too dangerous. We've had some incidences where some of our guys' lives were in danger, and we can't run the risk of that happening. Now, at the time, I had been just showing up as the guy that was paying for the parties, the guy that was paying for some of the operations and stuff. But I had a separate foundation. I didn't want any of the donor money from O.U.R. coming to pay for my plane tickets or my hotels or even my security as we're out there. So I was paying for a lot of that myself, but I needed to figure out how to have a tax write-off on it. I told the foundation, I said, guys, I was telling Tim and his sister was kind of running the books on the thing. And I said, All I need is a piece of paper I can give to the IRS showing them that I'm actually spending this money to do operations as part of a foundation. That's all that I need. I need to be able to write it off on my taxes. I don't need any reimbursement whatsoever. Well, it was like fighting tooth and nails to even get a letter like that. So in talking to Tim, he said, you probably ought to start your own foundation. And then you can run it all through. I said, that's great. We'll do that. So I started the Child Liberation Foundation for the purpose of putting my own money in so that then the foundation could pay for my flights and everything else so I could write it off, so I could legally do legal charity stuff in fighting child trafficking. So that's all that it was. I wasn't raising a whole bunch of money on the outside at the time. This was all that it was just mine in the beginning. And he said, is there a way that we could have your foundation start doing the pre-op stuff, finding the children and setting up the things for the party, et cetera? And then he said, and then we'll come in with the cameras. And that's what they did on a lot of these operations, is he would come in with the cameras on the day of the rescue. And we would bring all the children, and the cameras would be there. He would tell the story of exactly where we got the kids, and we would show the public. For years, that's what we did. Is my foundation would go in and we would pay for the security. We would find the kids, and they would come in and they would tell the stories. I went with Tim together to Paramount and Sony and Lionsgate because we knew that there's a certain group of people who will go to watch a documentary like what we had with the abolitionists and others. But there's a lot bigger group that's going to go watch a feature film. And if we're going to create a movement, if we're going to really eradicate child trafficking, we have to reach the masses. And that's not going to happen with a few documentaries. We've got to have something big. We've got to take this story to the world. And so we did. We went in with all of these big Hollywood groups, and they were interested in the story, but they wanted to change the storyline. They wanted to have full control. They could have put me and Tim in a bedroom together doing horrible things in the middle of the movie, and we couldn't do anything about it, right? And so we decided that we would do it privately. And I committed that I would put the first money into funding the movie about that rescue mission we did in Colombia, that very first one, and some of the other rescues that we had done since that time, putting all those stories together. So we were looking for different people that could actually do the movie itself. I'm the one. Now, this is important for later in the storyline here. I'm the one that very first met the producer. I met Eduardo Verástegui at an event in Los Angeles. He was premiering his film called Little Boy. It was an amazing film. I shared with him the story of the Colombia rescue. He said, "Hermano, we need to make a movie about this." I said, "Absolutely." And from the beginning, the movie was supposed to be about the children. About the children. In fact, I had multiple conversations with Eduardo, with Alejandro, with Rod, with the scriptwriters, where the focus needed to be the children, their plight, everything else. Well, they felt like the focus needed to be on the hero. And so we took multiple rescue missions and multiple operators and put them all together into one storyline and a handful of actors. So, for example, my character in the movie was Pablo. I was the one that helped pay for it and went undercover there. There was more people that paid for that than Pablo, right? Glenn Beck and his audience were a big part of it and raised a bunch of money. There were some of other private investors, some of which that I introduced that helped to fund it as well. The character that Jim Caviezel played, we had to put many different things that other operators did and other things that happened on other operations, and we folded them all together into one storyline. The sad thing is when anything, whether it's a documentary, whether it's a big movie, whether it's just the rescue missions, anytime those things go to feed one person's ego, it's actually playing in that same energy that the traffickers are in arrogance and ego and greed and manipulation. This is all things that we saw with them. Now, at the time, full disclosure, I wasn't Paul Hutchinson. I was Paul effing Hutchinson, right? I had a basketball court in my basement. I had a helicopter. I had a plane. I had nice cars. I had a lot of them. And I was that kind of guy that could write that kind of check, that could show up and say, hey, we're at this kind of party, whatever else. And it worked. It worked with the traffickers because those guys were attracted to that kind of energy, right? Those kind of guys who had big, arrogant egos that could write those checks and hurt other people because of the arrogance that they had. As we're moving forward, I was super close to Tim during these years. And he came to me and he said, hey, Paul, he says, I've been talking to some people. I really think that I want to become senator. And this is the first time I'm like, wait a minute, you're rescuing kids. Why do you want to be a senator? He says, oh, because I think that I can make a bigger difference in fighting child trafficking if I'm a senator. Okay, I don't know that you can. I think that we have really good men and women who are in political positions who want to help fight this fight against child trafficking. But they have a whole bunch of other things on their plate too, right? If you can help them help pass some laws and stuff, that's great. But for you to be a senator, this is the first time where I started thinking, okay, is all of this publicity with the cameras being there at these operations and the movie that is that part of paying for a Senate run? Or is this really about the kids, right? And so we had this conversation. He talked about being a senator and maybe even someday going on some bigger political offices than that. And he saw himself as somebody who was going to be a big leader in the Mormon church as well. I have no problem if that somebody wants to be a leader and lead people to good in whatever capacity. I'm good with that. I've got great big goals myself. I don't want to be the prophet of the Mormon church, and I don't want to be a senator, and I don't want to be the president. I don't want to be any of those things. But, I had goals at the time. I wanted to build my fund to a certain level. I wanted to buy a super yacht someday. I had goals as well, and I'm okay with that. But if those goals are being bolstered by a foundation from people who are donating $1 a month or $5 a month or whatever it is to help rescue the children, but in reality, a big portion of that money is going to promote one man's ego or one company's logo, then I have a problem with that. And at that point, I started seeing a little bit of the writing on the wall. Where things really got weird is when I got a call from Tim, and he said, Paul, he says, Dave Lopez is on the out. He's trying to destroy my reputation. He's trying to destroy Operation Underground Railroad. We need to call Glenn Beck. We need to call Tony Robbins. We need to make sure that they don't answer any calls from him whatsoever. Now, by this time, I had a good relationship with Tony and a good relationship with Glenn and a lot of these other guys. And I told Tim I'm not going to make those calls. Why? Because Dave is a good man. I knew Dave. Some of these other guys, I didn't know how good of a man at the time that Glenn was. I didn't know how good of a man at the time that Chet and Fletch were. I didn't, all these other guys that were being pummeled, I didn't know. But I knew Dave. I had worked with him a lot. He was a good man. And he dedicated his life to fighting child trafficking. There's no way that he would try to destroy something that was fighting trafficking. That didn't make any sense at all. But I said, okay, I'm here on board. I'm helping, but I'm not going to call and try to. He says, well, we have to make sure that he can't work in Haiti anymore, that he can't do any of that stuff. Now, I didn't realize until years later, Dave, being the man that he is, didn't talk crap about Tim, didn't talk crap about O.U.R, none of those things. He didn't tell the whole story until years later after I was in the same position as him and got outed. That was the beginning of the end right there. That's where I started seeing things going on. So as he left, now I thought, you know what? Maybe Glenn and some of these others are still doing some good work. I started looking into them and realized, yeah, they've got some good foundations and they're helping to eradicate trafficking. They're rescuing kids. They're taking down pedophile networks, and they need some extra funding. And so I started directing resources and people and whatnot to help them. And even some other people that worked with Tony Robbins that were part of his platinum group and others, they had their own foundations that were fighting trafficking that I agreed, hey, I'll help with some of them. What do we need? Meetings with them, money there, et cetera. And so as I started helping anybody in this realm, why? because it's not all about one company's logo and it's not all about one man's ego. It's about the children. It's about the children. And this is not a fight that one person can do. This is something that every single one of us can get involved with. Every single one of us can come from a place of love, can come from a place of healing, and we can heal ourselves, our families, and then we can turn around and help fix this problem as a whole. I got a call from my attorney. My attorney met with me and he showed me an article that's out of Newsweek. Said, will nobody save the Yazidis? And do the Yazidis face extinction? The Yazidis were a group of people in Syria, in Iraq, that ISIS, the terrorist fighters there, had killed most of the men. Because these people, the Yazidi people, worship different from them and look different from them. This picture is this beautiful little blonde girl, right, with blue eyes. And they said they had killed most of the men. They had taken over 3,000 women and children and were using them as sex slaves. And I looked at this article and I thought, this is horrific. He said, this is something we need to take and see if O.U.R is willing to do something, if Tim's willing to do something. And, I was super close with Tim at the time. We were talking all the time. He was at my house like 2 or 3 times a week. In fact, even when I was out of town, he would call and say, hey, can I come and use your house? And he was there all the time. I have this beautiful spa in the basement. So because I had that connection there, he brought this in and I took it to Tim. I took it to O.U.R and I said, hey, this is something we ought to. He says, yeah, your attorney talked to me about that already. And yeah, let's see what we can do. And so Glenn Beck had a group of men in the Middle East already, amazing men that were helping relocate displaced Christians during all the wars and everything else that was going on. And the place was too dangerous for a lot of governments to get involved. And so it was private organizations like those guys that were going and getting the job done. And these guys were hardcore. I mean, one of them, a guy by the name of Rudy, he was over anti-terrorism for most of Africa at one point, right? There was other guys who had been in wars since they were 7 years old. They had seen a lot of crap. One guy got like 17 bullets got hit at some point over his whole career. And so these were badasses. And so we have a conversation with Glenn and he's talking about those guys. And I said, listen, I would be interested in helping to transfer these guys' attention over to focusing on the Yazidis and doing what we can do there. In fact, I'm willing to write the first check. Let's start moving these guys around. And then Glenn goes to his audience and boom, they start bringing in all of this money. And these guys rescued thousands of women and children that were in a horrible position. I actually went over early on because I had written that first $50,000 check and met with all of these operators. Moving forward, Glenn Beck then wanted to film some of the things that were going on. And there was a woman there. She had been taken by the ISIS fighters. Her husband was killed. Her brothers were killed. And she was taken, used as a sex slave. She had 3 daughters. Well, our team had rescued her and one of her daughters, and she was in Australia. She thought her other 2 daughters were dead. And one of her daughters was 9 and one was 13 when they were taken. This was 4 years ago, before this operation. And the 13-year-old was now 17 and was rescued by our guys and was taken to Australia. And she said, I think my little sister is still alive. And I think I know where she is. And so with that intel, her little sister, who was 9, now 13, named Naveen. With that intel, these guys were able to identify where she was. And so we flew over there with myself and Tim and Glenn Beck and Andy and some of these other guys were there to actually escort her from Iraq to Australia to film her being reunited with her mother. And Andy, one of my dear friends, undercover operator, done a lot of stuff, he agreed to help to fund it. And so $250,000 later, he had helped to fund this thing out of his own pocket and invited me to come because I had put that first 50 in and we wanted to be there and see really what was going on. So then I'm thinking, okay, I'm funding some of these other guys. Maybe I'll have a fundraiser. Maybe I'll put something together and start raising some money or some awareness. And I had a little website that I put together about the foundation, was starting to raise some, and that made Tim mad, because anybody who was showing a logo or anything else, my foundation was only supposed to be my money. It wasn't raising anything else. I'd be stealing money from his foundation, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. That was flag number 2. I should have recognized the flags number 5 and 6 way back before, but I didn't. Then I decided to have a fundraiser. It was a beautiful fundraiser. We had it at the Sky downtown Salt Lake, and Jimmy helped put it together. We had a bunch. I have relationships with some NBA players. I have relationships with a bunch of ultra wealthy families, and we invited them all together for this beautiful fundraiser night. Now, I wanted to promote all these hidden heroes that had been in the fight, that were on those operations with me, that were running their own foundations, all of those. We wanted to raise money for the Child Liberation Foundation that would help to fund all these different groups and all these operations that we were doing. And one of them was going to be Tim's foundations, Operation Underground Railroad, and a new one that his wife was now running called the Children Need Families, which was helping with adoptions and stuff. I invited Tim. I said, look, we've got all of these guys that are coming that are going to be speaking. We want you to speak about your foundation. It's going to be a beautiful fundraiser. Well, he agreed. We send out all the flyers. Everybody is all coming to it. 2 days before the event, Tim calls me. He said, the only way that I'm going to come and speak at your event is if you can promise me that 100% of the money that you raise will go only to my foundation and my wife's foundation. I said, wait, what? He said, yeah. He said, I'm not even going to be there if you're going to give any of that money to anybody else. And I said, Tim, there's a lot of people in this fight. There's a lot of good people in this fight. That a lot of them are hidden heroes. A lot of them don't have the resources that I do to bring people together to help fund what they're doing. And if you pull out right now, it's going to look really bad. It's going to actually look bad for you, Tim, because all of a sudden you were there and then you not show up. Everybody is expecting you to come. He said, well, I'm not going to do it unless you can give me all the money. I said, how about we do this? Why don't we set it up where I give you the microphone for a certain period of time while you're there? In fact, I'm giving each one of the foundations a specific allotted amount of time to share to the audience so that the audience can see all of the different people that we're helping to support. I said, while you're speaking, you've got all this credibility because you've been doing this for a long time and you worked in the government, all this stuff. I said, why don't, while you're there, you can tell them anybody who donates right now can earmark their money to my foundation, and anybody who donates while you're speaking, or anybody who writes on their checks, this should be for Children Need Families or Operation Underground Railroad or Nazarene, any of your foundations, if they dictate that that's where their money goes, you get all of that, all of it. If it's the entire audience, great, whatever it is. Reluctantly agreed to come. So he came to our fundraiser, and we had some of the other operators and the other guys who run other foundations were speaking. And then Tim came up to speak. He more than doubled the allotted time. He took the time of the next group that was supposed to come after him. We had to move things around and raised very, very little money for his foundation. Very little. In fact, we didn't have anything that was actually specifically allocated for his that was written on any checks whatsoever, but that's okay. He was there. We're going to give him a percentage of everything that was coming in. Then we had an opportunity for one of my operators and me to stand up. And me and Andy get up, and we're sharing the microphone, and we're telling this beautiful story about the mother saying that thought she had lost her children, and this amazing, amazing opportunity to see this little girl reunited with her mother, where both of them thought they were dead after 4 years of being apart. And it was such a beautiful, beautiful story. And we were just telling the audience what was going on. Now, the only picture I had of this little girl was me and Andy standing with her between us. And so that's the picture that we put up with her face blurred to protect. And right then Tim and his wife sitting on the front row, his wife, Catherine, stands up and makes a scene, like literally in the very front, and the whole thing's going on. She makes a scene, grabs Tim's hand, and they storm out. I'm like, well, that's weird. Okay, so we finish on stage, and I get down. I go to the back of the gala area. I said, "What's going on? What's going on?" And Catherine, Tim's wife, she's like, "My husband risked his life to be there, and you didn't even put his face up there." I said, "Wait a minute. He was just on stage, took more than double his time talking about your foundation and his other ones, and had plenty of opportunity. In fact, his face has been up before on some of the other things we've done, and it's not about him. If I could have just a picture of that little girl without me and Andy on it, I would have shown that, right? It's about her. It's about the story of her being reunited with her mother. It's not about Tim's face being up there." And they stormed out and left. Well, that was kind of the last straw. I was like, that was a big deal. And then they had their financial people from O.U.R. saying, "Hey, you promised you'd have this percentage of what your proceeds going to O.U.R. I'm like, okay, whatever. So we went in, I wrote a $30,000 check to O.U.R. I shouldn't have written anything of it, because none of the money that was raised at that event, not one penny, was earmarked there whatsoever. And they blew up in the middle of it and ran out. We were raising money for a lot of different things that were there. I didn't have any obligation there, but we did. We wrote a $30,000 check, and hoping that would kind of mend some relationships there. Then I get a phone call. I get a phone call from Tim saying, "All right, we need to meet. We need to fix some things." And I'm saying, "Okay, great, we'll meet." So Tim comes to my house, and he brings with him his Mormon bishop, who was doing something in one of his foundations, one of his uncles or some relative there, some other people that his psychic was there, this lady who was, reading some things and telling him that, he's speaking to old Mormon prophets, stuff like that. And he brings in, Glenn Beck was there at my house. There was a couple others that were there at this meeting. And then Tim pulls out this huge whiteboard. They bring this big whiteboard down and set it up in my porch underneath my deck in the house. So we're out there, this beautiful area by the pool, this huge whiteboard. I mean, we're talking, I think we're 6 feet wide, 4 feet high, and he's got all of these markers. And we all sit down on the chairs, and he said, "Okay, I need to tell you what is supposed to happen." He said, "I've been in communication with some of these leaders in my church, in his church. One of them was Mr. Ballard, who shared names with him, but he wasn't related." He said, and this is what God said needs to happen. And this is already making the hair on the back of my head stand up. God said what? Okay, God talks to me. God talks to you about you, but God doesn't talk to you about me. All right, in directing my life and what I should do. So he puts this big whiteboard up and draws this square on one side of it, on the left-hand side. And this square he puts the Child Liberation Fund. He changes it from Child Liberation Foundation to Child Liberation Fund. He said, the reason why I think you should change it to fund is that it has one purpose, and it is to fund these other specific organizations. And he draws out Operation Underground Railroad, Children Need Families, the Nazarene Foundation, Liberty and Light. And so I'm looking at these, and okay, Operation Underground Railroad, he's a founder of that. He's on payroll for that. The Children Need Families, he's his wife's foundation. Somebody in his family is on payroll on that one. Nazarene Foundation, he's the president of that one. That's one of Glenn Beck's organizations. He's on the payroll of that one, right? And then this other one, Liberty and Light, he told me this is one that was put together by some of the high-ranking members of the Mormon Church, that he was working together with them and some wealthy people in there. I'm like, okay, I don't know that one, but I understand where you're going with this. And then he draws money signs coming down from my foundation, the one that I'm putting my money in, is anytime I get a big distribution, et cetera. He said, money signs coming from that down to these organizations. He said, these are the only ones. This is the whole purpose of Child Liberation Fund, is to fund these organizations. And then he said, what I'm going to show you next, legally I can't do. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. You would say that, but okay. And then he said he draws underneath it this big bucket, massive bucket, and writes TimothyBallard.com on it, right? And he has all of these, he says, this is where all of the eyeballs, all these people that are being attracted by these foundations are coming down to this. The purpose of these foundations is to benefit this TimothyBallard.com. He said then, and he wrote down there that 2.7, he's going to earn $2.7 million a year. I don't know where he came up with that number, unless it was what his goal was with all of these different foundations that he was sitting on. And he would write 3 to 5 new books. He would get paid $50,000 to $100,000 each time he spoke. It was all money, 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 right? I was like, yes, okay, that doesn't feel right. And then he wrote Sizzle. He wrote the Sizzle on the Operation Underground Railroad and a couple of these others. He wrote Sizzle. This is the Sizzle. This is the videos, these videos of these children and what's going on. We're going to take the Sizzle, and that's going to create all the eyeballs coming down. All of these people that are going to be focused on TimothyBallard.com. Now, I had already had meetings with him where he told me that his goal was to become a senator and all this other stuff. And I'm thinking, I'm really feeling now, holy crap. There's a lot of good people who are donating money to him and his foundation who really believe that the majority of their money is going to eradicate trafficking, to the rescue and rehabilitation of the children. And later I looked at their Form 990 and I realized, wow, there's a huge percent of it that's allocated as creating awareness. Creating awareness. What does that look like? That looks like thousands of soccer moms in Utah holding signs that say O.U.R, O.U.R, right? This is a whole bunch of TV stations and promotions of Tim Ballard's face. But I'm not okay with that if the purpose is a political run or anything other than helping to rehabilitate these kids, period. And so that started not feeling right at all. And then from this bucket, he runs this line up around to the top. And at the top, he puts a for-profit organization called Slave Stealers. This for-profit being benefited by all, being supported. He has these lines up from the nonprofit supporting this for-profit, right? And this for-profit owned by him, a wealthy guy somewhere in southern Utah and St. George area named Brian, and Elder Ballard, this secret silent partner that's part of the church, as one of his partnerships on this for-profit. Now, I don't know if Elder Ballard was really part of it or not, but Tim was using it as credibility as to how this whole thing should work. And then he says, with this line going up, he said, we're going to use the sizzle of the rescue to bring them to the covenant. Now, I know because I was a member of the church for a long time, that means to be baptized, to bring them into the covenant, is to bring them into the Mormon church. Now, like I said earlier, I have no problem whatsoever with the church. Some of my best friends on the planet are active members. My parents are active members. My grandfather was a bishop and a patriarch. My children are active members. But I do have a big problem with somebody using the sizzle of the rescue to bring them in to your religion. That doesn't feel right at all. And so my personal assistant at the time, she got up, she left the room. She said, I am sick to my stomach. She was actually a member of the church at the time. She left because of that. That was the last straw for her. She says, I'm not going to be involved with this. Now, I'm not blaming the church. I'm blaming what I saw on that whiteboard. And I said, Tim, I'm done. I am done. I'm done with any money. Not only are you not going to get all of the money from Child Liberation Foundation, you're not going to get any of it into Operation Underground Railroad, into anything that you are running right now. Because this is about the children. This is about the children. It's not about anybody's arrogant ego. This isn't about anybody's Senate run. This is about the children. Now, I've been involved in the financial world for a long time. And fortunately, I had a man of pure integrity at the helm as we were building our fund with John Pennington. And I saw a lot of people that were in other businesses that were using what I would call money laundering or racketeering to illegally move money from one place to another. I saw guys that were doing pyramid schemes and whatnot. You can make a lot of money. You can build a successful company. You can build a successful foundation. But if your foundation is flawed, it will eventually crumble. If your foundation is built upon anything other than being completely transparent with your donors, completely transparent with your investors, then it will eventually crumble. There's not anything that's going to be hidden long term. And this is what's super sad to me, is seeing now, looking back, how many things started to crumble. The worst thing that can happen is for millions of good men and women who saw the Sound of Freedom movie to then get disenfranchised and not wanting to help fight this evil, thinking that for some reason, because somebody is working in a place that's out of integrity, that somehow that child trafficking doesn't exist. Not true. I have been there. I've been there so many times, and so many good men and women have been there as well. And I'm here finally going public for that purpose, is to help you see that. Now, understand this. Going public for me was one of the hardest things that I've ever done, because of the fact that I made a promise to myself then and there, as I walked away from that whiteboard, that I will never use the sizzle of the rescue to bring them to paulhutchinson.com or my face, my ego, my popularity. A year ago, when I was being pressured by everywhere, from family, from my heart, from God, to go public, I said, can we please have it about the message, not about the messenger? Because I don't want to ever be seen in the light that I just saw there, ever. And they said, no, Paul, you need to be that person because you've been in the pit of hell. And as long as you speak from a place of the heart, from pure compassion for the children, for the operators, and even in some cases for the perpetrators, if we can come from a place of compassion, we can heal the planet. We can fix this problem. We can eradicate child trafficking. So I leave that whiteboard meeting with an entirely new direction. No longer am I going to funnel money to those foundations. We started funneling money to others, to these guys who are actually doing the work, and it wasn't about them, it was about the children. And immediately, I get on that same blacklist that those other guys did, that Dave Lopez did, that Glenn did, that all of these other guys over the years, that unfortunately, I was the guy pulling the trigger. I was the guy that was drinking the Kool-Aid thinking, yeah, if you're against Tim, you're against fighting child trafficking. Well, now I'm on that other side. And less than a week later, I get a cease and desist from Tony Robbins' organization. Now, I don't think Tony had anything to do with this. I think that it was Tim going in and talking to his attorneys and everything else. I had Tony's picture on the Child Liberation Foundation site with me at something, and they're like, you cannot use Tony's like and image. He had been on that site for years, as long as I was drinking the Kool-Aid, as I was still part of Tim's organization and his posse. But the second I said, you're not getting any of our money, boom, I get the cease and desist. Fine. I don't need his picture on there. And it took years, but now Tony and I are back on really good terms. But unfortunately, he was told the same story that I was told. Paul's trying to hurt the organization. He's trying to be all about him and his foundation. All I was saying is I'm not going to buy into what I just saw on that whiteboard. That's all. That's all. You know, he goes into other good guys like Glenn and others who we had worked together and helped to co-fund some things. And now all of a sudden I'm on the blacklist. Glenn's coming into Salt Lake and they won't even have a meeting with me. Really? Really? Is that because you believed what was going on Tim's whiteboard, or you didn't see what I saw? Fortunately, now over the last few months, a lot of the truth is coming out. A lot of the truth that I started seeing early on with some of the people that were there at my house with him while I was gone on the cameras and stuff. I'm like, wow, This is not a man acting out of integrity. And so now, fortunately, the truth is starting to come out. But for a long time, I was on the blacklist. And my reputation was thrown down the toilet just like he did with Dave, with Glenn, with Chat, with all of these other guys. We wanted to continue doing the work. Unfortunately, the movie was already made, and there was a lot of attention placed on Jim Caviezel's character and a lot of focus being him being the hero. We had, after the movie came out, we had a premiere of the movie where I invited a whole bunch of the operators, guys that were hidden heroes. We called it the Hidden Heroes event. It was beautiful. After the show, we had microphones out and we had all of these guys talking about their experiences being undercover, their experiences seeing the kids. It was a beautiful honor for so many good men and women who most of them had zero recognition from Tim, from O.U.R, from the movie, from anything. And so giving them that recognition to their family, to their friends of the things that they had done to put their lives in danger over the years. Now, the blacklisting continued with me, wherein Angel Studios, very LDS and some of the guys that were running it, hearing Tim's story and purposely keeping me out of the premieres, of the ability to show it to some of my people internationally. I've got texts back and forth between me and some of the owners there that are like, why are you out showing this to me? Are you kidding me? You guys are paying for Tim to go everywhere to promote this, and I can't do it on my own dime? Billy, I was the primary investor. I was the primary investor in the film, and I can't go out there and show it with some of my people and help promote it just like everybody else. I have a problem with that. I really do. And unfortunately, they didn't know what I need. I probably should have made this film, this recording. I probably should have done this months and months ago so that they could hear the truth of what was going on. I'm sorry if my energy over the last hour has been frustrated in any way or pointing fingers in any way. Let me end with this. I am eternally grateful for Tim Ballard coming into my life and showing me something that transformed everything and helping me see what child trafficking was, helping me get involved with something that was so meaningful to me. I am really sad for what has happened over the last 5 years. I am sad that he would turn around and take somebody like me who was so loyal to him for so many years and try to slam my credibility with people who I loved and trusted, like Tony, like Glenn. I am sad for the women who have come out against him, saying that he manipulated them, that he did some very horrible things from a sexual standpoint with them. I don't know. I wasn't there. All I can say is that I experienced that kind of manipulation. I experienced that kind of arrogance, that kind of greed. And all I can hope for is healing. Healing for those women. Healing for anybody that he hurt, all of these other operators. But most importantly, healing for Tim. Because I think he did a lot of good. He created a movement that has helped fight child trafficking in a way that has never been seen before. I honor him for that. We can all come together to fight this evil. And it's not going to happen with any degree of arrogance and greed. That goes for individuals, that goes for foundations. Together, we can fight child trafficking and we can end this globally. but it has to be something we come together on. Guys, this has been hard for me. It's been very emotional for me. This last 10 years has been emotional for me. Being cut out of being there at some of the premieres of my own movie, the one that I was the primary investor of, because people were told things and it was all about one person and not the others. That was very, 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 very difficult. But I hope and pray that we can all heal through this, that we can come together in a spirit of light and hope and truth, and together we can eradicate trafficking. Thank you for joining me on the Liberating Humanity podcast. This has been very difficult for me, but I want to extend my love for everybody who's been involved in this fight, including you. Sharing this podcast with other people is part of being involved in this fight. Together, we can eradicate child trafficking, and together, we can liberate humanity. Thank you.